Well, it's been a couple weeks since the new league year began for the NFL, so happy new league year to all of you who celebrate. And in those couple of weeks, the Falcons front office have signed, re-signed, extended a bunch of players. And today, I'm joined by our Tori McElhaney to go over a couple of those players that could be key players in the 2025 season. Tori, thank you so much for joining me. Over the last couple of years, there has been so much for this Falcons in free agency. There's been so much money that has been thrown at free agency, but it's a little bit different this year. How would you explain the first 2 weeks so far of free agency?
I would use the word conservative, and I don't necessarily think that's a bad thing. The Falcons didn't have too much cap space to work with this offseason, which meant they couldn't be big-time movers and shakers like some other teams in the league. They had to be very precise in their movements about who they go and get and who they retain.
All right, so let's kind of talk about the guys that they went and got. Let's start off with Leonard Floyd, the edge rusher coming from the San Francisco 49ers, but he was a Georgia Bulldog who turned a Chicago Bear and then hit a couple places along the way before coming back to Atlanta. Pass rush has been such a conversation for this Falcons defense for the last couple of years. Why will he be able to help this defense?
So this is a veteran guy with experience in a few different systems. Raheem Morris is in Los Angeles included. He's consistent in his presence off the edge to the tune of 48 total sacks since 2020 and nearly 100 quarterback hits. He's someone whose stat line has grown as he has. I was talking to him just this week and asked him, what's the difference about you now than maybe the guy that you all at home remember watching from his Georgia days? And he said back then he was someone who could get by and just rely on his sheer athleticism. Now he's matured in his understanding of the position itself and what it takes to see success continuously, which his stat line shows. He's someone who adds a bit of veteran presence to a relatively young edge rusher group.
Exactly, very young edge rusher group. And I kind of want to talk about how so many people, so many fans always say, get the best guy available. It doesn't matter how much money they're worth, just get him. But it's not always about just the best player available. It's also about the guy that can fit this defensive scheme. So there's a new defensive coordinator for the Atlanta Falcons in Jeff Ulbrich. How does Floyd fit this Jeff Ulbrich scheme?
So I think it's as much about what Jeff Ulbrich and Raheem Morris come together to make that makes this Floyd acquisition so interesting. Leonard Floyd is obviously someone that has a productive history with Raheem Morris. They won a Super Bowl together, after all. So it's marrying what Morris knows he has with Leonard Floyd to what Jeff Ulbrich ultimately wants this defense to be. To me, it's a pretty seamless transition between the two because of Morris and Ulbrich's history together.
Gotcha. So let's kind of stay on that defensive line a little bit because defensive lineman Morgan Fox, he signed with the Falcons 2-year deal after spending 3 years with the Los Angeles Chargers. His signing comes after the release of Grady Jarrett. So he could fill that hole for Grady along with some other guys that are already part of this Falcons roster. What do you see so far in Morgan Fox?
So I'll say this, I don't think that there is any replacing Grady Jarrett one for one. You're right to point out that it is going to be a by-committee approach. Think Zach Harrison, Ruka Roro, David Onyemata. These are guys that I think are going to be a part of this committee. And let's be honest, this by-committee approach to both the leadership of the unit and the production you get from it, Morgan Fox is going to be a part of that committee. He's a role player, a kind of utility guy who you can kind of play where you need to along that defensive front. You turn on his tape and it's littered with these moments where he's kind of this cleanup guy for you. He may not be the first guy to the quarterback, but he has some quickness to him that can put him on the quarterback as he tries to move out of the pocket.
Perfect. So let's go ahead and get to the second level of this defense because Divine Diablo signed a 1-year deal with the Falcons and he will join the inside linebacker group with Troy Anderson and Caden Ellis. When you look at what he can bring, we already talked about the guys that fit the Jeff Ulbrich scheme, right? Why does he fit this scheme?
Because he's the exact archetype of what a Jeff Ulbrich inside linebacker is. Think a little leaner and longer Foye Oluokun from Jeff Ulbrich's last run around in Atlanta, a former college safety turned pro linebacker who has the speed and the skill set to drop into coverage when needed. Because Troy Anderson has been injured for much of his career, speed at that inside linebacker position is something the Falcons need a bit more of. So enter Divine Diablo, who I do think provides that.
All right, so let's kind of talk about the guys that were re-signed on this roster because we kind of already touched on the guys that signed. 9 guys were re-signed for this Falcons team that were already on the team prior, 4 of which are on the defense.
Yep.
One of which I do want to talk really quickly about. He signed a 3-year deal. That's cornerback Mike Hughes. Why was this such an important re-sign for this Falcons secondary?
There were a few names I felt really strongly that the Falcons could and should retain, and Mike Hughes was one of them. He solidified himself last year as a trusted option opposite A.J. Terrell. In fact, his 63 catch rate allowed as the nearest defender wasn't too far off from A.J. Terrell's at 62%. When Mike Hughes was healthy, he was a consistent piece for this defense. Bringing that back in 2025 just eases the mind a little about what you have, because you know exactly what you have in Mike Hughes and you do trust that.
Yeah, you kind of talk about easing the mind a little bit, because I think coming into the draft and coming into the offseason this year, a big conversation was there was a need for the cornerback. With a 3-year re-signing of Mike Hughes, does that need kind of fall by the wayside as we start to look towards the draft?
I don't think so, because the nice part about the re-signing of Mike Hughes is he has some versatility to him. You can put him in the slot or outside depending on what you decide to go out and get in, let's say, the draft or in future days of free agency. I do think that Mike Hughes will continue to be a starter for this defensive unit, but exactly where he will be starting will be very interesting to see.
All right, so you already mentioned it, because free agency is still ongoing. We can have guys re-sign or sign with the Falcons moving forward throughout the year. Think about like Justin Simmons and Matthew Judon from last season signing way later than everyone else did. But this first 2 weeks is really the first big, and it's the biggest wave. It's where all the media focuses on, right? But after those 2 weeks, the media and the fans start to look a little bit towards the draft. So let's quickly do that now.
Yeah.
When you look towards the draft, after what the Falcons were able to do in this first wave of free agents, what do they still need to go out and get?
Still has to be edge rusher,
Yeah.
right? I mean, I know that you like the Leonard Floyd acquisition. You feel good about Arnold Ebiketti's progress. And you get Braylon Trice back from injury, but you gotta go get more. I also don't think it hurts to look in the interior a little bit too if you have a few guys that you like. There are a couple guys in that first round that I personally really like. And even though you did sign someone like Jordan Fuller at safety and brought back Mike Hughes, I'm not above shoring up the secondary. Either cornerback or safety will do. So that's the long answer. The short answer is defense, any level.
Any level will
Any
do.
level.
Does not matter. Okay, well, we will see what the Falcons do in this year's NFL draft. That's happening later in April. The Falcons are sitting at the 15th overall pick right now, and then they'll have 4 picks in days 2 and 3. For those of you who want to learn a little bit more about the college prospects and who could be entering in this year's NFL draft, go ahead and check out Dave Archer's top prospects. I say go ahead. I don't think we've actually done that yet, but they are coming. So Dave Archer always goes through his top prospects every year of the guys coming into the league, and you guys can watch that on YouTube, social, and AtlantaFalcons.com. Tori, thank you so much for joining me, and I think we're going to be doing this soon again with your mock draft.
We'll be back.
All right, bye guys.